Startuprad.io, your podcast and YouTube blog covering the German startup scene with news, interviews, and live events.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Joe from Startuprad.io, your startup podcast and YouTube blog from Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, bringing you cutting-edge innovation and technologies from the DACH region. This is March 2024, and it's Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. Doesn't sound very fun, but it could kill you if you don't pay attention to it. So therefore, I would like to welcome Guido here with me today. Hey, Guido, how you doing?
Doing good. Thanks, Joe, for having me.
Totally my pleasure. We will very soon get to why a Swiss guy in Silicon Valley or in the Greater Bay Area is tuned into our podcast, because we are talking about a biotech company from Germany where you are the CEO. But before we jump into Mainz Biotech, can you introduce yourself a little bit? Because I've seen you're a very interesting guy. You are actually an electrical engineer by training. And the first question I had is, do you still fix stuff around the house?
That's why I had time dialing in here, right? So Joe, it's really a pleasure to be on your podcast here, and really looking forward to sharing a bit more about myself and the vision of myself as well as of Mainz BioMed. The question is, how did I end up here, right? So I am an electrical engineer, and I'm actually born and raised in Switzerland. I worked for Roche Diagnostics for many, many years in Switzerland and then in California, really growing up with PCR. PCR, many of you had no idea what PCR was before COVID, and now many of you know what PCR stands for. It's basically the technology that enables us to find the needle in the haystack. What that means really is it's a technology that enables you to find viruses, like we did with COVID, and a little bit of swabs, and then you were able to stick in liquid, and the technology actually found whether you had the COVID virus or not. So I spent many years in this technology, again, in a large organization with Roche, and afterwards joined the small world companies. I joined a small startup in the Bay Area, and so I was really experiencing the California hype of speed, innovation, creating new solutions, combining this with my upbringing of a big organization with the Swiss heritage. It was exciting. It was a very exciting time. And I came across Mainz BioMed about 2.5, almost 3 years ago now, in the middle of COVID, while I was running a mega COVID lab here in the Bay Area. And I love the concept of, something, a colorectal cancer test, med testing, collecting your sample at home, shipping in the mail, get the results back, talk to clinicians. That whole concept was very intriguing to me. And Joe, that's how I ended up where I am now. I love the company. There you go. Exactly. Here is the
for all the people who are listening to this on the radio station and on the audio podcast, we are holding up 2 different packages. They're basically home tests. What Mainz BioMed, the biotech company from Mainz, makes sense, is doing. But before we get a little bit into this, I have one more question, because you said you've been with the Roche company. Makes sense. You were born and raised in Switzerland. You studied there. Then you joined a Swiss company. And then at one point they sent you over to California. But where was the break? When did you decide to really go from being, at one time I've seen you've been in charge of the program management at Roche. I assume that's a situation where you don't get a lot of sleep. When did you decide to go from this position, very secure position, very good company, very well paid, into startups? That was something I didn't get from your CV.
It's also better explained live than putting on a CV. So, when you were with the Roche is a really wonderful company, a lot of innovation, and also able to train their staff very well. So what was unique with me too, because I went through a variety of different type of departments, which really enabled me to understand every aspect of a diagnostic company, from early research to very complex, regulatory studies, FDA approval, CE, IBD marks, etc., including the commercialization, on all the regulatory requirements that goes around it. So I really had a really good, and that was my last job at Roche, really managing massive programs globally, really learning and training me every aspect of running a company, just at a very massive scale. So what you then do is if you're ready to jump, right, as we call it, and try to go in a small organization, and not everybody is going to like it, because in a small organization, you never have enough money, you never have enough time, you never have enough resources. You do it. If you don't like something, you fix it yourself, because there's nobody behind you who's going to do it. I love that concept, right? I was kind of doing similar stuff at Roche. I really brought some new innovation there as well. So that's why it was an easy transition for me from a big to a small organization, to really being able to go into 10, 15, 20 people, no processes in place. It was quite interesting to learn through that, big learning lesson. But there's some type of, especially living then, I actually moved to California in 1994. That was, many, many years ago. So I really was exposed to innovation. And many of you live wherever you live, there's a lot of innovation coming out of California, because there's an interesting combination of intellectual thinking as well as capital to make it happen, right? I always say there's a lot of innovation coming out here because there's capital. Harder to get capital in Europe because there's just not the risk profile of investors in Europe is different than it is here. So that all kind of compares it a little bit, why there's so much coming out of here, because it needs both, right? You need the innovation, which you have in other places as well, but in other places you not necessarily have the risk, the low risk investor who says, okay, I'll give it a try because I made a lot of money last time, I'll give it a try. And so I think that's the combination, Joe, that really, got inspired. I mean, it was inspired, but I wanted to try it out, and I didn't know how it's going to work out. And it worked out well. I loved it. Again, this is my third startup now. We had some great exits with some of the other ones. We saw big parts of it. So not everything worked perfect, to be clear. That's not how life works. But when you fail somewhere, that's a stepping stone, for next successes. So I think you gotta be able to accept that, right? So you're gonna accept to make a decision that may cause something to go wrong, and that's okay. Because if you don't make it 3 times, it's okay, because you learn from it, you move on. That's what I love about the startup, because everything you do is different. You generally don't do the same thing twice, because you move fast, you move on, you find partners, you move on. So it's just different with the big organization where you're just being put into a box and you do certain things every day. In a startup world, that dynamic is really quite different.
Mm-hmm. I see. And we may talk a little moment about the setup here. So basically, Mainz BioMed is located in the city of Mainz, very famous made by being home of bio and tech. The company is, on the other hand, listed on NASDAQ, so you're already a public company, and you, as the CEO, are living in California. So I think there's some way to discover Mainz BioMed when you're in the US right now, and if you're interested in biotechnology. But how did you meet the company, and how did they convince you to become the CEO?
Yeah, so that was interesting. I connected to through an investor into the Mainz opportunity. Again, I said it's I think first time I met him was in February or March or April 21, which many of you remember. You couldn't really travel anywhere, but because I'm a Swiss citizen, I was able to get to Europe. So I met the team, and I was very intrigued by the culture. There was a small group. At that stage, the company was called Pharm Genomics. They did a wider development of different type of PCR products, but also started the development and initial testing of the colorectal product, the version that what we have in the market today. And I was just intrigued by, again, me being European, having worked in Europe, having worked in the US, there's an interest actually of people work in the US and work with European companies to get ultimately that product into the US market. Because as we will talk later today, Joe, I assume, but Europe is an interesting market, but most, for us, the driver was to get the product into the US market, because the massive market we have in US, and it's just generally easier to get innovation into the market in US, just from a reimbursement point of view. You can also get, your reimbursement coverage in the United States, which means also you have several 100 million people, where in Europe you have to go through reimbursement country by country by country, which takes generally a lot longer and is more cumbersome. So it's that the interest I had is, again, helping that European company not only to expand in Europe, but ultimately get the product also launched and commercialized in the United States, where the market is really, really massive. So that's kind of the way I got excited about it, Joe, right? Knowing, again, it's easier. It's really easier for somebody who is, has seen both markets, right? Many people have done the European market, want to go to US, but you must understand both because they're so different. In many ways, the way physicians think, the way patients think, the way the regulatory works. So I think was the aspect for me that really worked in a good partnership with me and the original founders of Pharmacogenomics to really create Mainz BioMed and ultimately move it to NASDAQ, and then also with our next generation getting the product into the US market.
I'm not sure about the timeline here, but have you been the CEO at the NASDAQ listing?
Yeah. I took the company public in November 21.
Okay. Before we get to everything else, tell us a little bit, how does it feel to list a company on NASDAQ? Because I do believe there are not too many people out there who could talk about something like this.
Well, I think there's clearly, I was running private companies before, and there are advantages and disadvantages of being a public company and a private company. But in my case, it was clear to be able to raise the capital to really build next generation products and getting the product broader into the market was again, the NASDAQ launch IPO was the right approach. This was really done in collaboration with some of the former investors of the earlier company to do that process. So it was an interesting process for me to go through, getting to know the investors and then ultimately launching the product in November. But then afterwards, clearly, then you feel there's everything you do is you're really on a board every day, right? Because everything you do, you talk to the community. It's we're spending a lot of efforts actually working with investors that we currently have on board, with public disclosures, etc. So it's a quite interesting. It's a very involved process. Not just to get into an IPO, but then maintain everything, right? There's a lot of rules from SEC about what you need to do, you need to follow through. So we got a lot of advice. We have a lot of advisors helping us what to say, what not to say, how to communicate, how to build the market forward. And so I think that's clearly then the other side as well. You get exposed to market trends, right? So as the market gone really sour in February, right? We raised some nice capital in early February, and then the war started, and everything changed, right? So I think that was something that you feel much more as a public company compared to a private company, because then you get exposed to different sentiments in the market that in a private company you don't feel that. So I think that's certainly a very interesting experience for me as well to go through that very challenging time, right, and continue to raise capital to continue to build the company forward. So it's been a really a challenging, to be quite fair, it's a challenging. We're not happy with where the stock value is of our company. We believe we have a significant higher value, but we also know how we're going to get back to where we need to be and where we want to be. So again, I'm a believer in, if you have good clinical data, you have good performance, ultimately the market will prevail. And I think we're starting to see it is that, the market this year is starting to get a little bit more positive towards biotechs. There's more biotechs. You saw there were no biotechs going on. There were more biotechs coming on, now more the diagnostic companies. So it's just a dynamic that you get exposed when you're a public company, that you don't even have an idea what it is if you're a private company.
Mm-hmm. I see. We just talking about biotech here, and a lot of our audience is usually listening to my interviews with software companies. So you have different regulations. We already touched a little bit on what the SEC does. For everybody who doesn't know that, they're basically the finance regulator responsible for regulating entities like NASDAQ and entities listed on NASDAQ. So they basically write the rules, what you can tell, what you can't tell, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, there are also the regulators for healthcare and the biotech sector. And what are the unique challenges and opportunities in this?
Yeah, so that's it's good to hear having some listeners on the software side. So I'm actually quite familiar with the software space too, being an electrical engineer myself. So I think some of the main difference here is you deal with people's lives, right? So we're creating results that are used to treat a patient or not treat a patient, or do surgery or do not surgery, right? So in my past, we've done a lot of work with hepatitis B, HIV, for example, which you're all familiar with, testing blood donations, for example. Let me give you an example, right? So a lot of work at Roche was going into anybody getting a blood donations because of, a disease or an illness or an accident. The blood that's been donated is being thoroughly tested for pretty much any antigens you could have, right? HIV, HCV, all of them, because I don't want to give it a blood to a patient and then ultimately the patient gets HIV. So that was an issue in the past. You may remember in the 80s, 90s, a lot of that was happening. So the regulations on some of our products and results we're creating is significantly higher than anything else, right? So, and so I would say significantly higher. So for the software industry, if you look at the level of software testing you have to do, for example, goes up the higher the risk is in industry, airline industry, etc. We know, for example, that the testing is significantly higher than when you buy a radio or something like this, right? So the same, I think it's a fair comparison, right? So because you want to make sure the plane doesn't come down or the door doesn't fly off if you take off, right? But in our case, it's similar. We have a different risk levels, right? If you are in a category, for example, we're in the highest risk category where we diagnose somebody with cancer or we tell a patient that they don't have cancer, right? So that's the highest risk regulatory, where the agencies are looking very thoroughly on how we're developing the product from beginning to the end. There's a specific process that you have to follow, starting with very basic requirements. What is the product supposed to do till you do clinical trials with sometimes many, many hundreds or many thousand patients to make sure your product is safe and works. It's not dissimilar to what pharma is doing, except it's a different process, but the concept as well. Pharma starts, dosing therapies first and then more and more, and ultimately have the large trials. So I think that's the major difference that we're dealing with, is the regulatory environment, which is important, right? Because I always think about it, whatever you do, think about your child or somebody else wants to use it. You want to make sure it's right? Or as right as it can be. And that's really the bigger difference. And I think that's certainly, it's a hurdle, because in our case, we're looking at a large clinical trials that has to be done for US. That's a big undertaking, but once you've done it, that creates a competitive hurdle for somebody else to come in. They need to do the same thing. So clearly, it's not, some of the, I don't want to downplay software products, but sometimes you can do something and launch a product in 2 or 3 months, right? You cannot do this in clinical diagnostics. It always takes longer because you got to make sure, the results that you put out is right every time. And also, if you then develop international products, right, the guidelines in Japan might be different than the one in Europe and US. So you have to be really understanding how that is. I think that's some of the dynamics I think we're dealing with. There's also always new innovation coming out coming back to, in our case with colorectal cancer, right? Or other cancers coming up. There's variations coming in. You remember all that with COVID, right? So we had all the different types of viruses, mutations coming up, and we had to make sure the diagnostic tests that we're developing were actually capturing those, right? So it's not an easy switch. You have to make sure that the next version actually covers not just the old variants of the virus, but also the new ones. So there's a lot of work that goes in that is, and then everything has to be done in a very controlled environment and tested again with patients to make sure they work. So Joe, that's some of the differences I would say that we're seeing in generally the healthcare space versus the non-healthcare space.
One of the most interesting questions, by the way, everybody who sees that I'm playing around with the softball here, it's actually something you said with your test package, and I just discovered it. One of the most interesting questions I had when I was thinking about the interview with you was, on the one hand side, you are a NASDAQ-listed company, you want to bring innovation, you want to move fast. But on the other hand, you're, as we already talked about, regulated by the SEC, regulated by the healthcare regulators. What kind or how can you cultivate a culture of innovation there? Because you always have to make sure it works out in the end. And also, you are the CEO that is frequently present in person, but also you do a lot of digital work. Can you tell us a little bit, because I'm sure a lot of people would be very curious how you can maintain here a company culture, because I totally do understand moving fast and break things just doesn't work as a model for your company.
Yeah. So, I think that the culture is important, right? So that's coming back to my previous comment about when I first visited the company in Germany. I've been, unfortunately, I'm not that young anymore. I've been over 30 years experience, and I hired a lot of people, and I had a good sense of somebody who's innovative, right? So somebody who is innovative but understands that there's a path how you have to do the work to get to an ultimate product, right? So it's not, you can't make shortcuts, right? So, but you can have innovation and then build a creative process to get the product, with the required regulations into the market quicker than somebody else. And let me give you an example, right? When you're trained in a large organization, you know exactly how rigorous the process has to be to get from point A to point B, right? You go to a startup, and the first thing is you're scared because they have no process, right? So, but then what you can do is you don't have to have the rigor process of a large organization. You can use the major points that are important and build a more dynamic process that has more flexibility, but ultimately still meets all the regulations. And that's important. And then when I've done this now multiple times, and now you combine this with the people skill set, right? You can't be successful in a startup when you have a can-do attitude, right? It just doesn't work because, well, go work somewhere else. It's about how can we do it, right? The question is not, oh, this is a problem. Okay, get it. A problem is often perceived as negative, but it's actually not. It trains you to be better. And then if you have the creative minds around it, how to address the problem and how to make a product, into the market in a more dynamic, a little bit flexible way, that's the mindset I'm looking for, right? And so when we go through Mainz now, we have regular meetings with the team. We have spend regular time in Germany. We have leadership team meeting. We have all hands meeting all the time. We're there. We have incredible open discussion with the team because everybody has challenges. That's if somebody tells you they have no challenges, they're not telling you the truth. Everybody's there's always something. But be open about it. Be open about it. And I think that creates this dynamic that, and challenge is an opportunity to how can you actually ultimately make a product better. Give you a concrete example. We've had a meeting with the extended leadership team, as we call it in Mainz. So this is basically the people reporting to the leadership team. And we ask them, what can we do better? They came up with 5-6 ideas. This process doesn't work well. This process doesn't work well. And then we let them implement it, right? So it's this back and forth that you need to do of, giving the team guidance where to go based on the experience, but then also letting the team come back and figure out how they could do it best for them in a creative way that still absolutely meets all the regulations. So it's a really interesting combination of culture assessments, but also, training the team members to how to do it right? So clearly understanding when you get a product in the European market, it's quite different than the requirements for a US market. So you want to make sure you train them on the US market and also show them the difference, what it's required to get it into European market. And so it's a lot of training. that needs to be done by also experienced people who really know what to focus on. Because not every aspect is equally important, but you want to make sure you hit the most important parts that ultimately get you to an approval. Sorry, long story, but that's how I look at it.
Don't worry. Company culture is a very important thing, and many people don't know how to really talk about it or how to touch it. But the best sentence that I ever heard about company culture is basically a company culture is established when you do something or want something and you want to bring it in front of your superiors and you already know how they would react. So that is something I would agree to. And oh crap, that's not what you mean by company culture, but they will ask this, they will ask this, they will be supportive and da 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 da. I do believe then you have established a company culture. Would you agree?
I think so, yeah. I think everybody should have the right to ask the question to anybody. And, give you an example, what we're doing, I'm meeting every new employee, and I'm back in Mainz and I'm there every 5 to 6 weeks for 1 or 2 weeks. I meet every new employee and they have time to talk about it. I want to know all of them. And I want them to know me. And it's an open door policy, right? So you have an issue, you can go to, if something is not right, raise your voice, talk about it, be open, be transparent. That's the only way, I do a lot of different type of sports. Soccer was one of them that I unfortunately can't do anymore. But it's a team sport. We're together on the same boat here. And I think there's no space for, silos, which is harder, right? You got to go across every department to be able to ask the question. And you should be listened to. If somebody makes a point about something, you should be able to be very clear. It's trust, right? It's a lot of trust. Trust is a big value for our organization. Trust, integrity, transparency, right? Customer focus. Those are cultural values that it's really important that you give this to the company early on and keep reminding them and keep repeating, talking about them, because that's really the ultimate goal, because you're all in together. If something went wrong on one side, the other side should compensate and help, because that's the way you ultimately can be successful. It's not easy to implement, but I think that's the process I believe every organization has to do. It's the open transparency, right? I don't like hierarchies, right? But you got to have certain hierarchies. But you can, in my case, I can, go past hierarchies by meeting with all the people individually, having lunch together, talking to them. You get a much better feeling what's actually going on, because the higher up you go in an organization, the lonelier it gets, because people don't tell you what's going on. So you got to go yourself. You got to go down and figure out what the heck is going on. I think I think the company feels that as well, as you have an open door and people start trusting, right? So it's about building trust across all functions and all levels of the organization.
When you talked about being in Mainz so often, I'm very sure that a lot of the flight attendants already recognize you. But getting from the little bit lighter topic here to a little more serious topic, we're here because it's a colorectal cancer awareness month. It's, as we already said, one of the few cancers you can test before by yourself with this practical home kit. No, this is not an endorsement contract. No, this is not sponsored content. It's very important for me because I lost multiple family members to cancer and currently have one that is fighting cancer. So this topic is very dear to me, very close to my heart. And can you tell us a little bit about what you're currently focusing on and how do you help people fight cancer, early detection, improving their survival?
Right. So the main focus of Mainz BioMed today is colorectal cancer. And Joe, as you already said, we have the kit that you've seen here. What you actually have to do is, as an individual, you have to collect these 2 little tubes that we ship to you. You collect very little amount of stools that we give you a very cool little kit to do this at home. You put it back in the box and you mail it to your local lab or to our own lab. The test then helps identifying whether you're at risk of colorectal cancer. And that's very important because, cancer in general, and I think that's very general knowledge, the earlier you identify the cancer, the higher the survival rate, right? The moment it starts having metastasized into other organs, it gets more complex and the survival rate is low. So early detection is important. And so what that means in colorectal cancer, the gold standard today is a colonoscopy. And for those of you who are younger, you've never done it. For those of us who are a little bit older, we've done it at least once or more. And so it's not a fun procedure. And that's why a lot of people don't want to do it. And so, but you should do it. You should do some type of screening of your colon on a regular basis. And that's what we're doing with our product. We basically offer you a non-invasive product that you can then, collect at home, ship it to the lab, and you get a result back. If the result is negative, that's good, which means we didn't find anything. If the result is positive, then we strongly recommend that you go see your physician, which may recommend a test you in the first place, to do a colonoscopy. Because what's happening in many cases, colorectal cancer there's a disease progression. So colorectal cancer always starts with a polyp. So you may have a little growth in your colon that ultimately may turn into nothing, but it could turn into cancer. And so it's very important, as we have some identify those precancerous polyps, that you do your colonoscopy to make sure there's nothing happening or they can remove it. I want to give you a very concrete example of a mother. Her name is Lisa. She was relatively young, way below the screening where somebody should get tested. She was a mother of 2 children, and she was pregnant with the third one. Lisa wasn't feeling good. She wasn't gaining as much weight with her third child as with the first 2. She went to her general practitioner, shared with them the experience, and the general practitioner basically felt like there's not a problem. You will gain weight, not to worry about it. But Lisa did worry. She did research. She came across Colo Alert. She ordered a test, and unfortunately, the test came back positive. She then went in with the test results to her physician, who then immediately ordered a colonoscopy. And the colonoscopy confirmed that she was actually colorectal cancer positive. The silver lining of this story is that because of our interaction, because of her ordering the test, she's still a cancer patient, but she was certainly identified earlier. And she was basically able to get through the treatment, and now she has a beautiful baby at home and she's doing very well. So I think, Joe, that's a very heartwarming story to us, because when you read an email from Lisa, it's beautiful, right? So because of our test, we not just, maybe saved her life, but we saved her life as being, her family as having a mother going forward with their children. So that's why it's important to have, our test or other cancer you can do. Any precancerous testing you have, I would do it, because it ultimately keeps you safe and gives you the confidence that you're actually not cancerous. And I think COVID has shown us that. How many of us have done COVID tests all the time because we wanted to know. We wanted to know. We don't want it to, make our family sick. We don't make our friends sick. And so that's something similar to me. Do the testing as much as you can yourself, because it ultimately can save your life.
Mm-hmm. One question we have a little bit circumvented is, I want to touch before we go a little bit into what you guys planning for the future is, why is Mainz BioMed based in Mainz, the city here in Germany?
No, the original company is actually, again, as I mentioned, it was called Pharm Genomics, and the company was based in Mainz already. So, Mainz is first of all, joking, but I do love Mainz, but it's a good region, right? Because there's a lot of great educated labor, right? There's a lot of other diagnostic companies in the neighborhood. There's a lot of pharma companies in the neighborhood. So it's actually a good ground to build an organization. There's also biotech is in the same building. Of course, they're, way different than we are. But it was clearly the foundation was there. The initial research team was there. So there was no reason for us to move it anywhere else. And we loved the name Mainz, so we just called it Mainz BioMed. So that was kind of the story of how it all came together.
That is good. And we now know what you guys do. Home testing kit. We know it's regulated, so it's very reliable. And we know you guys are listed on NASDAQ, which is usually, or which is a growth segment. So you do have future plans to grow. What will be the people seeing in the future?
So there's clearly, we want to continue to expand in Germany, as well as in other countries in Europe. And you've seen some of those. If you start following us, you'll see we do have some partnerships with other countries, with other laboratories in other countries. So we continue to grow, and distribute and make that product available to a larger population in Germany and Europe. Next step really is how to get into the United States. And also there's two products. So we have the product in the market today, but we've done over the last 2 years a lot of research and invested a lot of our capital into the next generation product, Joe. And that's very important because the current product we have is very good. But what we wanted to improve is the detection of these precancerous lesions. Because, we're very comfortable with the performance we have with our current test with identifying cancer. But as an organization, we have a vision to become a company that can actually prevent colorectal cancer with an non-invasive, simple stool test. And we've done research now for a little bit over 2 years, looking at different type of biomarkers that we could add in. And I mean by biomarkers, there are other tests, other, specific DNA variations that we want to identify, or RNA. And so that's what we've done. We've done the research. We've done the multiple studies to show that our next generation product is actually superior to anything else out there, identifying these precancerous lesions. And that's really a game changer, right? It's really, our goal is to become a gold standard in not just detecting colorectal cancer, but those precancerous lesions. Because if I can tell you that you have the precancerous lesions, you most probably will go into a colonoscopy and you will not have cancer, right? So that's the important part. If you do this regularly, right? We propose to do our test every 3 years, for example. If you do this regularly, the chance of you not having cancer is very, very high, right? And so it's a simple test. As I said before, same concept here, that you collection process will be similar, but the result is different, that we have a higher sensitivity for picking up those precancerous lesions. And that's the next generation product that we also plan to get into the US market, and then of course also into the European market once it's gone through all the regulatory authorities for Europe.
Mm-hmm. And it's not like a little sickness that somebody can simply overcome. More than 50,000 Americans die each year from colorectal cancer, and I just found data from EU27 for 2020. Almost 70,000 women and 87,000 men died in 2020. In the European Union, EU27 from colorectal cancer. Yeah. That's quite a lot of death here.
Yeah, it's one of the largest cancers, unfortunately. It's what's interesting is, unfortunately, it's growing in the younger population, and we've had lots of discussions. So like the case of Lisa that we had, she wasn't even 40, right? So I mean, this is like hitting sometimes people that are in the 20s and 30s, and that cancer is very aggressive. So the unfortunate reality is, we're starting to control it a little bit better. Like in the US, you can see it controlling a little bit the people getting screened. But now there's a new group coming up that's younger. And there's a belief it has to do with, just sedentary behavior of people, the eating habits. I mean, I don't need to tell all the viewers that, fast foods are growing everywhere, including the places we didn't think would happen, but it does happen. And so that's just not the right. So that's really causing an issue for colorectal. But for example, we also do some research in pancreatic cancer, which is growing as well. So it's important to think about that, right? So as we think about this next generation product, that we're really eliminating, right, not just cancer, but identifying these precancerous lesions to reduce, patients having cancer, and which then ultimately creates an incredible savings in healthcare costs, which people always want to understand. How can you reduce healthcare costs? Well, here's an example. If I can prevent a lot of patients having cancer, because it gets really expensive once you have cancer, and you don't want to do this. So quality of life gets better if you don't have cancer, and also you can save a lot of healthcare costs.
I see. Best of luck for that. Actually, I usually end with two questions that are a little bit different here. Usually we ask for the VC investors, are you guys open to invest, to talk to new investors? But actually you're listed on NASDAQ. Yes, you're open to new investors. We link your investors relations page there. And of course, you're always looking for qualified people. We will also link your careers page here in the blog. Everybody who'd like to learn more, you can go down here in the show notes. There is a link to your LinkedIn profile, as well as to the investors relations page, as well as to the careers page.
Great.
Even though we faced quite some technical challenges, but fortunately I have a Swiss engineer on the other side, so we made it work. Thank you very much, Guido. It was a pleasure having you as a guest.
Absolutely. It was really nice, and thanks again, Joe, for having me on the show. It's been nice to share with you a little bit more who I am, and again, the culture we have at Mainz BioMed. And I think together, I think we all agree, right? So we have to find and create better tools to save lives, because of those of you, any of you, are ever been touched by cancer, you know how painful it is for yourself, for the family. And so anything we can do together. That's why the March Awareness Month is really, really important. So please go out there, help us convey the message to other people, and for yourself, right? Take care of yourself. This is important.
Great. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
That's all, folks. Find more news, streams, events, and interviews at www.Startuprad.io. Remember, sharing is caring.